and welcome to Overview. I'm Donna and I'll be your host this evening. Our guest tonight is Dr. Patricia Lamb, a professor of English at Westminster College. We'll be talking about her book, Touchstones, Letters Between Two Women. Stay with us and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Overview. As I said before, our guest is Dr. Patricia Lamb, and this is Touchstones, called Letters Between Two Women. And when was this published? It's been out for a while now.
1983, 5 years now.
Okay. Now, what is Touchstones about?
It consists of letters between myself and I guess by now my oldest, in both senses of the word, college friend. We met in Salt Lake City at the University of Utah, where I was an undergraduate before each of us got married. And when we married, we both went overseas. She went to Europe and then Lebanon for a couple of years and then back to Europe. And I went to England and then East Africa, where I lived for 9 years. And we were so far apart and we could scarcely afford telephone calls. So we loved each other very dearly. And we wrote lots and lots and lots of letters, which not many people do these days. Mm-hmm. So it's a record of our personal lives in the form of letters, and right from virtually the day each of us got married. Mm-hmm. And
well, I've read this book, I have to admit, and it seemed to me as I was reading it that both of you are in such remote parts of the world at times,
very much, yes.
that this was your only tie to civilization as you knew it in America.
Yeah, it was partly that, and partly a tie to our own pasts, except, you know, we had our families. I wrote oodles of letters. I have a couple of shoeboxes full of letters to my own mother, and Joyce equally voluminously wrote to her parents. But we wrote to each other more as a kind of valve on the pressure cooker of our lives. It let off a little bit of steam, and to share things with one another, to explore issues that it was impossible to explore with our husbands because we each married foreigners. Both of them were fairly remote, distant sort of men, more so perhaps than their American counterparts. Mm-hmm. And we were living in foreign countries, so we had no American women friends that we could exchange the kind of things that people need to exchange to stay reasonably healthy.
Mm-hmm. And the strange thing when you look back at all these letters is that your lives went in sort of parallel paths.
Yeah, they did, yeah. Well, I think maybe they were very traditional times. It was to grow up and become 20, 21 in the mid-50s it was a time of probably more traditional and conservative than any other period since before World War I, and their sociologists and historians are beginning to see that now. And a lot of studies of the 50s, they were a very strange, regressive sort of period. And so we did what we were supposed to do, which was get married immediately out of college. I got married before I left college. And have children, bing, 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 and 2.3 children, and live in thus and such a way. And each of us took another way out of suburbia and the 2.3 children and the husband with the gray flannel suit coming home every day. She married an artist, German, and went to live, as I say, in the Mideast as well as in Europe. And I married a British doctor who was in the British Colonial Service, he was about to serve in the East African Medical Service, and we went to Tanzania, Tanganyika as it was then. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, was this a conscious decision?
No.
No.
Nah.
Just the way it happened?
No, you just don't think of things that way. That's in the book. We didn't know what we were doing. It just all seemed, it seemed very romantic. Mm-hmm. I went youth hosteling in Europe the year before, and that's where I met the man who became my husband, and met him in a youth hostel. We were both hitchhiking through France and Spain. And it was all, terribly romantic. We went back to Paris together and lived in a garret for a few weeks, and he had to go back to Ireland to finish his medical degree, and I had to go back to the States. And mainly because I had no money left to live on, and didn't want to starve to death. And Joyce met her husband in Santander in Spain, where she had gotten a fellowship for 6 weeks at some kind of art festival. And she was a poet, and she still is, and her husband was there on some kind of fellowship painting. Mm-hmm. So that's how they met. So they were whirlwind, international, very romantic romances and so on. And
you knew your husband for a very short amount of time.
Well, we knew each other 10 days before he proposed, in the old-fashioned sense of the word, and then we were together about another 3 weeks, and then we separated, and we were apart for almost a year. We were engaged, And I met him in New York when he got off the ship, and we got married immediately. He did his internship in this country. Is where I started writing letters from Los Angeles, which is my hometown. And then we went overseas, and we were abroad for 10 years.
And did you ever miss home? What did you miss most?
Movies.
About movies?
Movies, yeah. You know, I didn't mind not having electricity or radio or record players or newspapers or mail delivery or fresh vegetables or telephones or gas or anything, running water, whatever. I didn't mind that nearly so much as I missed movies. I mean, that sounds dippy, and books. And, you know, when we lived on these tiny little upcountry stations with 10, 12, 14 English government officers and their families, and maybe a planter or two, you know, depending on the area, a long, long way from anywhere. Very, I mean, remote beyond belief in the kind of world, you know, that we live in today. And somebody new would get transferred to the station, and because this is all government service. And you'd walk into their house the first time saying, "How do you do?" You know, and you come in and put your head sideways and sort of read the titles of their books, seeing if you've read them all already. You get people with very strange collections. I read my way through the daffiest bunch of stuff, you know, the history of shells, the history of shell collecting, and that kind of thing.
Well, that was a large part of your correspondence with Joyce, was talking about books that you had both read.
Yeah, well, we both love literature and love books and love reading, and we cut out a lot of articles, and my mother was very good. She sent a lot of paperbacks and the most bizarre assortment. And I mean, the complete works of Ouida, the mystical late 19th century novelist, very strange stuff. But she sent the Los Angeles Times. She would just roll it up and put a ribbon around it, and off it would go through the mail. And people would subscribe to magazines for us and so on, because we were just civil servants. We had no money at all. We were very poor. And everything cost an absolute fortune in East Africa, because everything had to come by sea, which it still does, I presume. And food also. I missed decent food. I missed friends. I missed conversation. I missed the kind of friendship that American women have.
Now,
I really miss that a lot.
Oftentimes people equate Americans and British because we share a common language. What is similar and different about the two groups? I mean, having lived amongst the British.
Well, this is hard. That was then. This is now. And then was not only then. There was a difference between living amongst the English in England and living this absurdly anachronistic, Victorian almost sort of colonial life. I mean, you had servants, and all the cooking was on a wood stove. I baked 2 loaves of bread a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, on a wood stove, cast iron, solid. You know, the kind. I mean, not fancy. You know, very old-fashioned. And you know, we dressed for dinner unless we were eating alone, dining. We had sherry, we had tea, and we had tea every day. I changed for tea. It was just absurd to look back on. So the kind of women who found this life tolerable were very stiff upper lip, rather upper middle class or upper class English women, or at least they tried to be and pretended they were and adopted the mannerisms of. And so I found myself, it was like living on a movie set or in a stage play, or having walked into the pages of some dippy late Victorian colonial or Indian novel. You know, it was very strange. And I went into it with great gusto. I thought, wow, this is fun, you know. I had a lot of fun for 2 or 3 years. And then it kind of
went downhill after that.
I got really bored because I'd had my babies. I'd learned Swahili. I learned how to bake bread. I'd learned how to make salads out of, what's that stuff called? Amaranthus, love lies bleeding. You can use the leaves for spinach. It's the same. All this stuff, and then pretty soon it doesn't pose very much of a challenge.
How about the countryside? There's a line from Out of Africa where she says, "Every time I turn my back, it's ready to go wild again," meaning her farm.
You could almost hear the grass grow in the rainy season. It grew an inch a night in the rainy season. The climate was appalling up country. It wasn't too great on the coast either. But you get used to it. The countryside of Tanganyika, as it was, it's now Tanzania, not Tanzania, which drives me crazy when I hear people saying that over television. The countryside of the whole of Eastern Africa is simply exquisitely beautiful. There's no more beautiful country in the world. I mean, you know, Tanganyika has Kilimanjaro, which is almost 20,000 feet high. It's got snow and a glacier on top. It has coffee highlands. Any place where coffee grows or tea is going to be cool and hilly and very, very beautiful, very green. It's got deserts. It's got, you know, an incredible variety. Coral reefs along the coast, the offshore islands of Zanzibar and Pemba. And
do you ever have a desire to go back to the
not
continent?
really. Again, I would say that was then, this is now. And I've been back, and I have no desire to return again, unless somebody paid me to go and do something or other. But no, there are too many other places I'd like to go.
Did you ever think of it as a mission, so to speak, because you were in a what they used to call a third world country, but now they call a developing country?
That's a hard question. It's a very good question. I think I had read rather too many Victorian novels, and yes, I did go out with a sense of, I will go help these poor benighted people to do this, that, and the other thing, and I found myself giving knitting classes to African wives, and I gave, it's absurd, and I gave literacy classes to adult male Africans for the most part, and so on, and did a lot of Red Cross work and a lot of Lady Bountiful stuff. Hello, I can help you join the 20th century, you know, quite disgusting, really. But we seemed to work awfully hard. All the wives did, and I suppose it's a good thing to join the 20th century, but it was primarily the sick, the appalling state of health of Tanganyikans that was so sad to watch, the appalling death rate of children. The infant mortality rate was 50–55% then. It's only gone down a little bit. And the life expectancy was in the 30s, 40s perhaps, for grown men and women. And the diseases were just simply unbelievable. Every single kind of disease imaginable.
Okay, we'll talk more about Touchstones. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Hi, and welcome back to Overview. Our guest this evening is Dr. Patricia Lamb. We're talking about her book, Touchstones. And you've recently taken some of your papers and put them into the, now I probably won't say this right, the Schlesinger Library. And what sort of a library is that? It's a very specialized place.
Yeah. The Schlesinger Library was founded by Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr.'s parents, and some years ago at Radcliffe College, which is the Women's College of Harvard. So in effect, it's one of Harvard's 100-odd libraries. And it is a library, it's an archives of American women's history. And it is the largest archive in the world of American women's history. And it has very strange, wonderful things like the largest cookbook collection in the world. And as I was mentioning to you earlier, it has manuscripts from the Middle Ages, cookbooks from monasteries and convents, all written, you know, in this lovely sort of medieval hand script. And it has colonial cookbooks, again in manuscript, people's own personal notebooks. I donated a couple of cookbooks, 3 in fact, to them after my doings with them. So anyway, I presume what you want to know is the Schlesinger have my papers, the Schlesinger has my papers and my co-author Joyce Holbein's papers. They originally got the archivist acquisitions librarian saw my name on a list of fellows who had endowed fellowships for, I was there in 1984-85 at Radcliffe as a Bunting Fellow, and she saw my name on the list of Bunting Fellows for that year. So she got in touch with me and said, would I like to come out to lunch with her and the director of the Schlesinger Library, Patricia King, and I said, sure, why not? You know, free lunch in Cambridge, wonderful. And so we went out to lunch, and they started by saying that they had read the book when it had come out in the year before, and were interested to see that I was a Bunting Fellow, and where were my letters now, the original ones. I said, well, they're in a box, you know. Well, where's the box? In my attic. Is it fireproofed? And I said, no, of course it's not fireproof. Who has a fireproof attic, you know? They said, well, how are how have you got the letters? And I said in a box. They said, no, what's the physical state of them? I said, well, I folded them, put them back in the envelopes, and they went, oh, shudder, shudder. And I said, why? What do you mean? Well, they said, these are valuable source materials. And I said, well, I suppose so, you know, really. One doesn't think of one's old, you know, letters and envelopes that you've written on the back of and so on. So the long and short of it was, they said, would I be interested, and would my co-author be interested in donating the original letters of this period, which is 1953 to 64, to the Schlesinger Library. I said, I don't know, I'll have to get in touch with my co-author. So I called her, and she said, well, I don't know. We'd had a couple of offers from other libraries to give us some very teeny amount of money, $500 or something, you know, or leave the letters to them at our death, the University of Texas, that kind of thing. And we said, no, I don't know. But Schlesinger then got onto us, and they kind of pushed at it, and they said, now, took me out to lunch again. They said, have you got other letters? Have you been writing to each other since? Long and short of that is, yes, we have. The letters go up to about 1980 or 81. Again, I just finished typing that lot from 1964 to 1984, and it comes to about 1,000, 1,200 pages of manuscript. And we finally agreed to donate them. We were invited to donate our letters to the Schlesinger Library and any ancillary collections we had. I have a gentleman with whom I corresponded for about 6 or 7 years. Our joint correspondence is also in that collection. My letters to my mother, alas, I did not save hers, and my friend Joyce's letters to her parents. They saved her 30 years of letters to them and my 30 years of letters to my mother. And those have all gone. They're all in. There's one collection called the Lamb Holbein collection. Then they said to me, having looked through this stuff when I got it from Wilmington and sent it to them, they said, well, now, you know, you're a great letter writer. Do you write to anybody else? I said, gee, yeah, a lot of people. Do you save all your letters? I said, no, but I know they do. And I save all theirs. So the long and short of that is that I also keep a journal, and I sent them some samples, and they said, yes, we would like those. All my letters, papers, anything I've written, including television interviews and so on. They want tapes, everything. Everything is going to be in a couple of giant boxes at my death. My son is my literary executor, my youngest boy, and he will shovel everything into a box and send it off to the Schlesinger, where it will go in the Lamb collection. So there are two collections. One is the Lamb collection, which is all my personal papers, except anything which has to do with Touchstones and any of the ancillary material that has to do with the people in Touchstones.
Now, what do they do about... No, it's not boring. It's very interesting. What do they do about preserving the letters? Now, they were appalled that they're folded up and being kept in their envelopes.
Yeah, okay. Now, this is, again, I think it's incredibly fascinating, but you might find this very boring. Paper, and I forget the time period, I think it's about 1860 or 70, they began, I'll probably get a very cross phone call tomorrow morning from somebody in the library over here saying, you idiot, it was 1832 or 1892 or whatever. But they started making paper out of wood pulp with a very heavy acid content, without the admixture of rags and without taking the acid out. It's very, very cheap. And these books only have a shelf life of 20 to 30 years in a library, or 50 to 60 years not in use, you know, covered where the air can't get to it, because it's the oxidation or whatever it is of this acid that eats the pages of books away. Haven't you gotten old cheap books and you just break the pages now? Okay. Virtually all paper, including letter paper, is made of the same kind of material. It just disintegrates and the ink fades and so on. They put every single page, not in the library, in the Schlesinger Library itself, of their books, but in the archives. Gradually they will put every page of every single thing they have in their collection into a bath, a fluid of some kind, which removes all the acid from it, fixes the ink, it fixes the paper, and it will then last for something like 500 years. And I called Joyce and I said, do you realize that the damn letters are going to last longer than the book? So yes, that's what they do. And they showed me, they took me down into the vaults, which go 2 floors underground, in the Schlesinger Library, and showed me the various collections they have. They have Lydia Pinkham. She was a lady who started a patent medicine company in mid-19th century in this country. And they have Amelia Earhart, all of her papers and letters and photographs and everything. They have, you remembered, I didn't.
Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony's letters. And a number of women who are not particularly famous as feminists or anything like that, but working in Julia Child. And I was saying they have the greatest cookbook collection in the world, which is fabulously interesting. I loved it, which is appropriate because it's one of the centers of women's lives, you know.
So they're not all women who we would consider to be feminists or leaders of the movement, so to speak. A lot of them are just ordinary.
Absolutely ordinary women, academics, writers, travelers, inventors, chefs, whatever, you know. And one of the problems is that people don't have very large paper collections anymore. They talk on the phone, they write memos, they put it onto cassette, a video, or a computer disc, and it just gets zapped. It gets disappeared when they're through with it, or else it's stored in a computer now, and that's.
How do you think that'll affect modern society by not having any tangible, something that we can touch, something that we can hold?
Did you ever see Star Trek?
No. The movie? No.
Any of them. Captain Kirk has a passion for old books instead of using a computer reader. And he's always, in the series, this is made fun of, and other people make fun of it and say, you're very old-fashioned, Kirk, and so on. I would feel that way 300 or 400 years into the future. I want to hold it in my hand. And it's the same when I write. I like to write on a piece of paper, or at least type it. I like to hold it in my hand. And so finally somebody convinced me, get a computer and then, just run off each page as you get there. So print it, so that's what I will be doing. But yeah, I don't think that it's going to stop the production of books. You like to hold it. It's a tangible, as you say, a tangible object. And it's very hard to think, where was that? 5 pages ago. Let me reread that paragraph, flip it, and read it again. Oh yeah, I see, and go back. You can't do that with a computer screen. It's very, not satisfying.
Now, your journal will also be contributed to the collection. How do you feel about that? Because a journal, a letter, while it is your private thoughts, it's going through at least one screen because you're giving it to another person.
Absolutely right. You're writing it for another person to begin with.
Right. A journal is not that. You can write anything.
I had told my son originally when I made him my letter executor, I said, now, one thing you must promise me is when I die, you can read them if you want, I don't care, but I want you to burn my journals. This is 6 or 8 years ago. And he turned sort of pale and shook a little bit because he's, like me, he saves absolutely everything. And he said, no, I couldn't do that, I'm sorry, I just couldn't do that. I said, well, then I'll get somebody else to do it. I said, it's just junk, it's just garbage, I just spew out everything that's in my head. I don't write Dear Diary every day, and I don't write the happenings of the day. It's usually just conversing with myself, and a lot of it is nonsense, but very, utterly, absolutely, 100% personal to me. And I said, there's nothing in there of any interest. It's not literary material, it's nothing, And he said, I don't believe you. Let me get a couple of them. So I said, okay. So he ran up the stairs and ran back down, holding 2 of them out. He said, now just open it anywhere and read. And I opened it anywhere and I read. And it was about the Clint Eastwood phenomenon. And the man with no name, and we're talking anime here and all this stuff, and it wasn't too bad. And so he finally convinced me that he shouldn't burn them. And when they were to go to the Schlesinger Library, I thought, do I really want any scholars in the 21st century to be reading, who cares? Fundamentally at bottom, who cares? So I've got these years and years, piles and piles of this stuff, most of which is garbage, despite what my son said. It inhibited me for a year or so writing in there anymore because I felt as if someone were leaning over my shoulder from 75 years in the future. And then I finally thought, okay, I will talk to that person that's leaning over my shoulder and see if I can't get them to sit down invisibly in a chair opposite me. And I had a little chat with future person who I had this vision of looking through the archives of the Schlesinger trying to find something to do a doctoral dissertation on. And I started addressing her as future person, shortened to FP. Now every once in a while FP and I have a little conversation, rather one-sided to be sure, in my journal. So that solved the problem. How
necessary do you think it is to keep a journal for a writer? Because that's usually an exercise that is always used in introductory to writing classes and things like that.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's so necessary, and I really question the possibility, or B, the efficacy of giving courses in journal writing. If it becomes an exercise, then it's not yours, it's for somebody else. And I don't think there are any patterns. I think you just write. And I keep a journal because I have to. I'm seized with an itch. It's like an alcoholic. I need a drink, I need my journal. I got to write for it. I had a marvelous weekend about a month ago with some video people down in New York. Well, about an hour and a half outside. And I started writing the weekend up on the train going to Grand Central Station. And I wrote into Grand Central Station, then I wrote while I was waiting for the bus out to Newark, then I wrote on the bus out to Newark, then I wrote, you know, and I got something like 28 pages written by the time I got to Pittsburgh to catch the car back to New Wilmington. I just had to get it down on paper. What I'm saying is, you keep a journal because you have to. You want memories, you want to explore something on paper, you want to work something. For me, it's like therapy. Hey, you know, $1.98 for 250 pages is a lot cheaper than $75 for a 50-minute hour. And that's what it serves as for me, partly.
Well, I've really enjoyed having you here.
Thank you. It was fun being here.
And giving us all this great information. Now, if you want to buy Touchstones, you can get it in Westminster College Bookstore. And again, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Buffy. I appreciated it.
Thank you for tuning in. On behalf of the Overview crew and the Cable 9 staff, I'm Donna Muth. Have a great night.